Welcome to MSL Corner, an MSL-focused podcast presented by Inizio Engage. Inizio Engage is an engagement and commercialization partner for the healthcare industry. Our medical affairs specialist area delivers medical information and medical science liaison solutions around the world. On this episode of MSL Corner, Jeff sits down with Senior Medical Liaison for U.S. and LATAM, Joseph Mejia, MD. Joseph is currently working with an Inizio Engage pharmaceutical client focused on early development strategies and support of clinical trial sites around the U.S., Latin America, and Australia. Jeff Vaughn is National Field Director of Field Medical Science at Inizio Engage and is our in-house expert on the MSL field. He brings with him many years of experience across various aspects of the career path and is passionate about training, mentorship, and best practice sharing. Jeff, over to you to kick us off.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another episode of our podcast today. Joseph Mejia joins us to discuss his journey and the unique role of representing medical science in a more non-traditional manner by assisting in the recruitment and support, as well as the development of the internal and external positioning of medical affairs and their initial venue for an investigational compound they're working on. So Joseph's been a tremendous example of how to migrate from clinician to medical, senior medical MSL, and provides a wealth of insights on the attributes needed to be successful in his role, which he very much enjoys. And we've also received great feedback from our client. But before we start, let's hear from Joseph on a little bit about your background and coming into this particular role as in a senior MSL.
Thank you, Jeff. No, first of all, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and share my experience. I think, as you pointed out, not only do I truly enjoy the opportunity, but also it's been great for my professional development. So if I look back into my previous career in industry, which started about 8 years ago, my first exposure was working as an educator for a large corporation. And in fact, I want to clarify that most of my experience has been for large corporations. After my initial experience in education, I came across the position of medical science liaison, and I felt like that would merge really, really nicely with my experience as well as my career. Professionally, I am a trained physician, and I worked in clinical practice for about a year. After that, I moved to the United States, and I've been working in varied roles within healthcare for close to 20 years. And as I pointed out, for the last 8 years, roughly around 8 years, I've been in industry. And as I mentioned before, my first exposure was with education, patient education. Then I became a medical science liaison for 2 different companies, of which I gained, I would say, the typical experience of an MSL, being able to engage with KOLs, understanding the business itself, which is something, it was something new to me, not only the industry, but as well medical affairs, working with medical information, working with commercial, working with marketing. So again, typically the MSL role that most MSLs jump into when they have their first exposure as an MSL. Fortunately for me, I was presented with this opportunity at psychotherapeutics, in which really came into a company that has not launched a product yet. So we are pretty much in the initial stages of phase 3 clinical trial program, which we're still recruiting. And this has been a tremendous experience for me as an MSL, and has allowed me to understand very broadly what medical affairs is all about. And not only medical affairs, clinical operations, um, also logistics from shipping perspective, because we also have or have had the opportunity to work in the EAP program as well. So overall, this has been a great experience for me. Certainly one that I probably would prefer to have taken earlier in my career, but needless to say, this is, I think, a good timing considering the experience I have already gained in previous experience. I mean, in previous companies working as an MSL.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Joseph. And I would ask you, when you took on this responsibility and considering you had been working primarily in a big pharma environment, what were your sort of initial expectations in terms of taking a contract position? And, how does that sort of differ from what you've traditionally done, almost having almost two parents per se, and having to juggle the responsibilities of what we've done on the back end, but then also meeting the demands of your internal customers and primarily your medical director, and working in such a small company, because there is so much variance, right? I mean, from working in a big company, and we've got clients all over the world where, we have to learn to adapt to the need. And it's varied because there are layers of, that are embedded in larger companies, whereas working for a smaller, company, and particularly working for two companies, if you will, how does that measure up in terms of what you initially expected, and how's it turning out now for you?
Well, to be very frank here, Jeff, it didn't measure up too much to my expectations because my expectations were skewed based on my previous experience.
Sure.
I can tell you, as you pointed out, working for two parents, quote unquote, it's in itself a challenge. For me, it hasn't been a tremendous challenge. And I think part of that is because of my previous experience. Again, as I mentioned before, coming to this new role as a contract employee, at the same time working for psychotherapeutics, at least I have a broad understanding of medical affairs, of commercial, of other aspects of industry that allow me to really navigate this experience a little bit better. I truly think that if I had joined um, psychotherapeutics under these circumstances early in my career, it would have been a completely different story. But having had the previous experience has helped me tremendously. And plus, again, my experience in healthcare as a whole has certainly transferred into this opportunity and understanding better a lot of the dynamics that take place. Now, as you pointed out, there's a huge difference, a huge difference between small companies like this one, which is very small, and a large corporation. In large corporation, the culture is very different. In a smaller corporation or smaller company, the culture seems to be much more relaxed, more demanding. And you would wonder why more demanding being a smaller company. Well, because you have many more responsibilities that you typically don't have in a well-structured corporation where you have different departments that are overseeing the operations of different areas of medical affairs. Here, we have a few folks overseeing the operations of the entirety of medical affairs department. And so certainly that creates a lot of opportunity, not only for growth, but certainly is a learning curve that can be steep at some point in time. And for me, it has been steep in some moments, and some other moments it's been kind of nice ride. But overall, yes, it's a very different experience culturally, operationally, logistically, time management, a lot of factors that are part of transferring your experience from a large corporation into a small corporation.
Yeah, I think there's a couple layers that you have to recognize when, particularly coming in from a larger environment and moving into more of a where you're under the microscope, right? But you're also wearing different hats. And I want to dig a little deeper into the specifics when you talked about the different elements of what you're doing now for Cyclo, what were some of the challenges maybe you hadn't had from your previous background, and kind of highlight, if you will, or some of the challenges that you've had where, maybe you didn't have that previous experience, where you're feeling like, wow, this was a great opportunity for me to learn and grow, versus maybe traditionally what you have done in the past, where you had a comfort level of, okay, I got this. So if you wouldn't mind, can you share with the audience a little bit more of the aspects involved in terms of what was more of a discovery to you working, in early stage development versus maybe that traditional role where you're doing like post-launch interactions with KOLs?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. No, and I would just briefly go back and to reflect on what you were saying, what I would expect or what I did expect going forward into this opportunity. Certainly, again, I brought my own concept of medical affairs, and I had a lot of experience at a superficial level in several aspects of medical affairs. I think the biggest change here has been digging deep, more detail, more granular understanding of those aspects that I understood very superficially before. So, for example, engagement with CROs, that's an aspect of the typical MSL that you typically don't have. Having the opportunity to engage with CROs, with CRAs, with lead managers of the CRO, with the project lead as well. Having those interactions have been extremely valuable because it really allows me, or has allowed me, to see what takes place behind the scenes. As an MSL, when you come in pretty much with a clinical trial that has been completed. You typically don't know what took place, all the challenges, all the obstacles, all the difficulties of working with a CRO and helping the sites activated, helping this, going through the SIVs or site initiation visits, going through the go live meetings, all these things, and even the different players within CRO. So there's a lot of players that I never knew in the sense of who did what and who was who. So understanding that has been a huge learning curve for me, but it's at the same time a big differentiator between what I did as a typical MSL and what I do today as a more broad international MSL. The other aspect, of course, is the fact that I have under my belt not only the entire US, but I have Latin America and Australia, as I pointed out, and even recently I got Taiwan. So I basically have US, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. So a typical MSL will not have that type of responsibility. That has been great opportunity for me. The other is the fact that I've been able to engage with the PIs from the beginning. We don't have a commercial team yet. We have a very seminal, so to speak, marketing. We also have a seminal, so to speak, patient advocacy group, and so I have had the opportunity to work with patient advocacy in a compliant fashion. Been able to work directly with the PIs and develop really good relationships that I think they're going to last for a long time because I started with them from the beginning. In fact, I've been tasked to uncover new clinical sites, which has been a wonderful experience. So I've been, so to speak, the first contact with some of these investigators. They haven't had contacts in the past, even with a CRO, or if they did, it was very minimal. But now I developed those relationships, and we're working through the process and bringing some of these sites in. So those are experiences that are extremely valuable and that have helped me understand so much deeper what it takes for a clinical trial not only to be executed, but to be successful. And along those lines, obviously, I've had the opportunity to engage with the Global Steering Committee, look at some of the, or actually be part of the development of the medical affairs strategy and internal and external branding, looking at the scientific lexicon, collating publications, and putting them together, which is also part of some MSL's roles, but also putting them together in a way that would be again relevant for the face of our clinical trial. So I think overall this has been a wonderful experience, and one that has really stretched my abilities to really move forward in my career, which I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that Elizabeth and I were really just contemplating unique subject areas to address on the podcast is because I think this is uncharted territory from a traditional role that we have as for MSLs. And we're starting to get more and more interest from different clients of putting senior MSLs with experience in the space to have early intervention and strategy. And I think it's important if conceptually, you want to develop your scientific experts. And in order to do that, we often get questions, hey, how early should I put a team in? How early can, we put our first expert in? And that it's a trick question, right? Because it all depends on where the life cycle is on a particular drug. But I'm always in favor with at least putting initial boots on the ground, or sooner than later, from a strategic standpoint. And I think that you're a great example of someone that we were able to kind of leverage as an expert with the company, and the company is teaching you early on how to become that in-resident expert. And part of that is meeting some of the investigators at the trial level early on, getting to know them, getting to know their challenges. I think all needs itself into becoming that expert at the ground floor. And I think you also, by coming in early, eliminate some of the noise that you usually will get when an MSL or an MSL team comes in at a later stage in the game. Like, let's say it's pre-launch, right? That's when you start bringing in some of your commercial folks. And then all of a sudden, this team that you have to train now has to more or less train and educate the commercial side, prepare for the launch. Everything's sort of rushed in, right? If you gradually bring in an MSL early enough, you have a working knowledge, not just of the sites, but also the issues. Things can get cleared up at an earlier phase of the development with putting an expert in and training them in-house. And sure, to your point, there are going to be challenges, or maybe you haven't done it because you didn't do it in a traditional role. But that's how it shows. It's a credit to you to show how adaptable you are, to learning the new, aspects of the role itself. But and also in terms of preparing for your career, your next step. I always get MSLs asking me, it's all about fulfilling their individual goals. And you spoke about like going into Latin America and Australia and Taiwan. I know that yourself coming from South America and speaking the native language, it really helps not just yourself and fulfill sort of those maybe bucket list items that you're looking to do, but it also helps the company as well, right? And so I feel like, it's putting someone and enabling you to expand your horizons in terms of your background, your nationality. Those are things that we always kind of individually look at from a leadership perspective and say, what can I do to enable that MSL in growth? And this is a perfect example of an opportunity where, yeah, maybe it's a little uncomfortable because you're taking on roles that maybe you're not accustomed to doing, but you're learning as you're going, and it's also fulfilling that professional growth that you're looking for, instead of just putting a seat, in a body in a chair to fulfill, an interaction or bringing back an insight. So I would applaud you for that, and open any comments that you have to say about that. Additional comments.
Absolutely, Jeff. I think that you have really nicely summarized not only some of the benefits, but also some of the experience that are part of this venture, so to speak, or this adventure, I would say, a better term, because I believe that bringing someone into a company is of extreme value. Someone, and by that I mean an MSL at early stage, and by that I would qualify that early stage, perhaps phase three, definitely. While you're beginning the recruitment process, while you're beginning those relationships with PIs, I think that's a very critical point to bring in an MSL and an experience, as you pointed out, because I truly believe you must have some sort of experience if you were to engage in an opportunity such as the one that I have had the pleasure to be part of, because you have to have significant amount, in my opinion, of business acumen. And obviously you can categorize what significant mean, but I would say several years, of course, in my opinion, would be 2 or 3 years of experience. So you have a broader understanding of medical affairs before you join a company at this level. But again, I believe this is of tremendous value, not only because I've seen it with my colleague outside of the US, but I also have seen it within the company. I've seen it within the medical leadership, how they definitely see the value that we have brought to this new adventure, that, as you pointed out, typically is not open to many MSLs. So it's of great value having someone begin at an early stage, pre-launch, of course, and this we're talking much more before pre-launch, because there are several factors that play into bringing the value that at least I perceive one can bring. One is, as you eloquently put it, is you develop these relationships with these folks from the beginning, and then you take away all that noise that you mentioned, the commercial aspect, the marketing, because many times when MSLs join companies that are fully structured, in all reality, in all frankness, you have to compete with the time of the physician. You have to compete with commercial. You have to compete with marketing, because sometimes marketing wants to meet with them. Leadership wants to meet with them. So you have an MSL fighting to compete um, with the time of these physicians. And I believe that if you develop these relationships, strong relationships from the beginning, you would be a great asset to the company as it moves forward, as the time for pre-lunch comes by, because you'll have such a general knowledge about so many aspects, not only of the clinical trial, of the science behind the clinical trial, of the questions that typically will be asked, or have been asked for now 1 2 years prior to launch. So you will be extremely valuable to a company and to commercial as well. and marketing, because you will be training them, and you will truly be, I wouldn't say a full expert, because it takes many, many years. I mean, it may take 10 years to become fully expert in some of these diseases, because there are so much layers in them. You know, we have, well, as you know, the biological aspect, the molecular aspect, the clinical aspect, pharmacology, pharmacological aspect. I mean, so many things. But I think that you certainly would bring a lot of value to the commercial and insights that they can benefit from when they have then their interactions, future interactions with the KOLs. So that would be my comment. That certainly this is a great model, so to speak, for future companies that are considering to incorporate such a model.
Yeah, I think you hit on some key points, Joseph. I mean, really taking a step back and looking at the qualified candidate for this type of role. I think it's important, as you stated earlier, about having a working knowledge of how the industry works as an MSL, right? I think that's foremost, to be just understand the environment. Even if you're not intimately familiar with the early developmental phase, you still have a working awareness of where you're at, so to speak, or where you're going to go next step. In terms of CRO experience working in clinical trials, would you consider looking at a candidate that maybe had a little less MSL experience, but then had a very working, like in-depth knowledge of clinical trial experience in this type of role?
Yeah, I think that would be extremely valuable. Certainly, if I wasn't on the hiring side of things, and I come across with a candidate who has significant experience working in a CRO, being a clinical trial associate, plus many, many years in that role, or even moving forward with, I mean, moving up within the CRO structure. And if that individual does have a good scientific acumen as well, I would certainly consider him. I think he would bring a lot of value, or he or she would bring a lot of value.
Sure. No, I mean, the other piece too that I always emphasize, and whether it's early development or it's someone that is taking on a more traditional MSL role, is the big business acumen side of things. I think you probably, based on our conversation, you have a deeper appreciation of how the business side works, because I mean, taking a step back and looking at sort of that early development stage, you're helping build a business. And in order to do that, it's not just securing relationships with investigators, but it's also identifying future ambassadors for, the scientific congresses to, let's say, get to a stage where there has to be an awareness campaign, on the particular compound. So I think it's not just meeting them, understanding the language, but it's also taking a step back and looking at a 10,000-foot viewpoint and saying, well, how do all these pieces connect with one another? And I think, developing your expertise is not necessarily always focused on the science, but it's also focused on, like, how does everything come together to one point where we have a successful to launch stage, and the FAQs, all the documentation that comes on and normally is visible by an MSL that comes on at that traditional stage. All that background, all that preparation is being done and accomplished by an MSL such as yourself, because you're getting that feedback, and you're getting that working knowledge and background. You can tell that fuller story, because ultimately questions will come, right? From once you get to a bigger, news about that compound. They're going into pre-launch. The studies are finishing up. You're getting involved with the FDA and PDUFA dates, and there will be questions about that working history and that story that needs to be told. And you have, being involved at that earlier point, you can fill in those gaps. And I think that's an important piece as well to kind of look at when it comes to understanding the business side of pharma, and whether you're an MSL overseeing your territory after, let's say, a drug is launched or it's approved, to even at the early stages you're involved in, having a business mindset, knowing how the parts all come together, I think is extremely important from a strategic standpoint. And you being a licensed physician, moving into a potential, medical director role in the future, this enables you to understand the larger scale picture that's involved, where, when MSL teams, scientific medical affairs are taking instruction from that medical director, you have an innate knowledge of what's involved on the back end. So that's kind of how I see it, with your career development. And, I think that you've echoed that in our conversation today. But it's a continual learning process. We understand that. But it also opens up opportunities for the qualified candidate that, maybe to your point about, hasn't some MSL experience, looking for a new opportunity for career broadening that is just outside the box. I think this type of opportunity serves not just the individual, but the company itself, to say, hey, look, let's put our science on the ground floor early on. And even if it's small and it's scalable, it's maybe a lot more work for you at the beginning, but I know it's going to pay off its dividends in the near future. So I think I just want to wrap things up and thank you, Joseph, for your valuable input, and certainly the flexibility to accommodate us today. I know you are busy with what you're doing right now with Cyclo. But I feel like this was a great example of something that is unique, that we are getting more and more requests for, in terms of like, hey, we're interested in maybe bringing an MSL on at these early development processes. And what do you think? And you're living proof of, hey, it works. And I love your story. I love your background, and really waiting for the next chapter as we go through this journey together as partners, to see what new areas that you can unfold by helping the company out, stabilizing them, putting a footprint in place, where, it creates the opportunity for a successful launch of that compound. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I'll leave with you any last comments that you have to say before we wrap up the podcast.
Jeff, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. It's been great. I would just echo what you stated. Certainly, for anyone that is looking for a non-traditional role as an MSL, having the opportunity to start at a let's say a startup company would be a wonderful opportunity for an experienced MSL. And I look forward to continuing, not only, as you pointed out, our collaboration, but I certainly look forward to new opportunities within the company to continue to grow professionally, and also to continue to learn, because this is a learning curve that's going to stay in place for many, many months to come. So with that, I appreciate this opportunity this time.
Thanks, Joseph. Appreciate you having being a partner in this podcast today.